Now we move on to the supply curve of a single firm and ask the questions how suppliers of a certain good behave when the price of the good changes. Then what happens if other factors change? So for example, the cost of production. And the third point is whether we can depict this graphically. And we will see that there are many parallels to the demand curve of an individual. Take again the example of cinema tickets. Say if the price of tickets is comparatively low in a certain city, then of course nobody would want to run a cinema in this town. So it would not pay off. The costs would be higher than perhaps the revenue that can be generated. So the supply of cinema tickets would then be zero, just as a thought experiment. Consider that the price is exogenously set. Now, if the exogenously set price increases, then at some point it will become profitable for a firm to establish a cinema and sell tickets. And when the ticket price rises further, then the cinema might expand production by hiring additional staff, add afternoon slots, perhaps even build a second cinema somewhere, and so on and so forth. So the bottom line of this is now that the supply curve is in the diagram of quantity supplied on the horizontal axis and price on the vertical axis, upward sloping. And that's the crucial difference to the demand curve. So we plot here now quantity supplied on the horizontal axis, price on the vertical axis. And we, as I said before, so if the price is very low, then the firm would not want to supply any tickets, would not want to operate because it would make losses. Only if the price exceeds a certain level, it will start to operate. And then with a rising price level, it would sell more and more tickets because it can try to expand production, basically. We can again, as in the chapter on demand curves, look at what happens if the price changes, and we will see that this is a move along the supply curve. So consider the situation we have here, where the price is P1, then the firm would supply quantity Q1 of cinema tickets per month, say. Now, if the price increases to P2, then this firm would expand production, as I said before, perhaps rent a second building, perhaps add additional staff, add additional sessions, and so on. And therefore, we would end up with a higher quantity supplied, Q2. So every price change can be depicted as a movement along the curve. We also have shifts of the curve here. What can shift the curve? Well, in this case, it's particularly the cost structure that could change and thereby shift the supply curve either to the right for an expanded production or to the left for a contraction. The first case would be this expansion here. For example, if for some reason the rents in the city decrease tremendously and the cinema price for the ticket doesn't change, then it may pay off to add other locations, to add another branch at another part of the city and so on, and that would expand production. By contrast, if rents go up or if the wages of people working in the cinema increase, then the costs of the cinema would go up. And for a given cinema price, the supply curve would shift to the left and we would have a lower supply for a given price level. A realistic supply curve would again be non-linear. So for example, here of this particular firm, it would not produce for a price below this level here. And then production would expand and perhaps rather quickly at low levels of the price. So if the price increases further, then production would be expanded quite a lot. But at some point, it may become more and more difficult for the firm to expand production, and therefore the supply curve would become steeper and steeper for higher price levels here. If we stick again to the example of the cinema tickets, then here perhaps it would be the case that additional slots in the afternoon are booked, perhaps one or two additional persons need to be hired, but then here you would need to establish a new branch and so on and so forth, and that's of course more expensive, so the price rise would have to be higher. So we can summarize the main takeaways with respect to the supply curves. The supply curve of an individual firm depicts the quantity that is supplied by this firm along the horizontal axis and the price along the vertical axis. And these supply curves are upward sloping. That's in contrast to the demand curves, which are downward sloping in the space of quantity demanded and the price. Similar to the chapters on demand curves, we have a movement along the curve if the price changes. Then the firm reacts by supplying a different amount of the particular good. So that's what the supply curve depicts. So the price change induces a movement along the curve. And other changes, such as, for example, a change in the cost of production, would lead to a shift of the curve. And again, realistic supply curves would be nonlinear. The reason why we usually deal with linear curves is just for convenience. So it's easier to do computations if the functions are linear, or also to depict them graphically. It's often easier to do that for the linear case. But again, keep in mind, the realistic supply curves would be upward sloping, but in a nonlinear way.